Captain Robert Daly stepped into the cockpit of his ship, USS Callister, and was happily greeted by the crew. Lieutenant Walton tells them that a non-Federation ship has suddenly appeared in front of their ship, and Robert quickly recognizes it as that of his nemesis Valdick. Their ship comes under attack as Waldak fires a beam, slowly breaking through the shield. The crew panics, but Robert remains calm. He instructs his pilot, Packer, to follow them into the asteroid's gas cluster and use it to counterattack. It's risky as the gas cluster could destroy the ship, but Robert is confident. When Packer starts the engine, it plunges into the gas cluster. The ship rocked and Robert ordered the crew to turn the ship over. With the enemy ships clearly visible, Robert gave the order to fire. It was hit directly and Vardak's ship lost its defenses. Robert orders Laurie to contact Waldak, but Waldak reprimands him and vows never to let go of the crystal. With this in mind, Robert Taraska ordered the destruction of Vardak's ships. The crew cheered, and Walton even apologized for losing faith in the captain. However, Dudney discovers that Vardak has escaped with the crystal using an escape pod. Still, Robert decided not to pursue, and the crew praised the brave captain. In fact, Robert Daly arrives at the Callister company. He noticed an error in his passport and told his receptionist Elena Duriska. Ms. Tulaska barely looks up from her cell phone as she allows Ms. Robert to enter. Inside, Robert meets Nate Packer and asks for coffee. Packer doesn't take him seriously, so Robert decides to leave. Robert ends up tripping over another employee's gym bag when Chennai Rowley walks past without noticing. On his way to the office, Robert passes the office of CEO James Walton. From his office, he finds his colleagues laughing at him for falling first. Robert takes over, and a new employee, Nanette Cole, joins. She says she's a big fan of him because he made the game Infinity and Robert thanks her. Nanette notices his collection and explains that it is merchandise from Space Fleet, a sci-fi series that predates her birth. She mentioned that the ship is called USS Callister in the series, and explained that Robert recommended the company's name when he and Walton set it up. Suddenly, Walton bursts in, telling him the customer is restless and needs an Infinity update. Robert apologizes and he says he will take care of it. Walton then notices Nanette, introduces herself, sits at Robert's desk, and offers her a tour of the office. After Walton and Nanette leave the office, Robert Kabir asks Dudney about an update patch, but Dudney says it will take about 7 to 10 days to fix some bugs in the game and want changes. While explaining this, Robert becomes distracted while looking at Nanette and tells Dudney to do whatever he says. That night, Robert went into his apartment and sat down at his computer. He puts the device on his temple and logs into Infinity. In the game he becomes Captain Daly. He asks Walton if he has found Waldak, but Walton says he has not, so Robert decapitates Walton. The crew are frightened, but Robert insists that Walton is sorry for him, so he does not intervene. After disembarking Walton, Robert continues to insult the crew for failing to spot the enemy, and they all agree with him. He then ordered Packer to bring him coffee, which Packer promptly received. Robert sits on his helmet and puts his feet on Walton. Robert has power over his friends in this virtual reality, but he leaves the game unsatisfied with it. The next day, Robert watches from his office as Walton befriends Nanette. Dudney then opens the door and an update tells him he won't be ready until December 24 due to changes Robert has approved. Robert can't remember these changes, so he just smiles in bewilderment and thanks Dudney. Nanette then goes to Robert's office and asks if he needs coffee. Robert gladly agrees. As Nanette is making coffee, Laurie approaches her and asks her how she is adjusting to her new office. She shares that everyone has been nice to her, but Laurie warns her about Walton, who she says is too nice to everyone. She also warns them that Robert is creepy because he stares at people. Robert listens to them unnoticed. After giving Robert coffee, Nanette returns to her own workstation and drinks her own coffee, unaware that Robert is still looking at her. Later that day, when everyone left the office, Robert quickly donned his gloves and snatched the lid of Nanette's coffee mug from the trash can. He goes home, takes a sample of Nanette's saliva and puts it into a machine that processes it. The next day, Robert gets to work as the process is still in progress. Suddenly Walton bursts in and chides him for the update being released on Christmas Eve instead of an earlier date. But Robert doesn't care because he only cares about Nanette and the processes his machine is running. Once the process is complete, a virtual version of Nanette Cole will be born aboard the USS Callister. Her completely confused she gets up and starts touching her own body. She cautiously went outside and she was surprised to find that she was in space. She arrives in the cockpit, where Lowry asks her name and Walton offers her a drink. However, Nanette has met them all before and is confused. Nanette suddenly feels dizzy during the procedure, so Laurie and Dudney help her into a chair. Lowry explains that they are in a modified version of the Infinity, designed like Robert's favorite TV show, Space Fleet. Dudney added that he is the only one who has access to this part of the game, Robert, making it his world where Robert controls everything. When Nanette asked how she was going to leave, Lowry told her she couldn't because they were just digital clones of her true self. Dudney informs them that they were trapped in his game because Robert took their DNA, placed it on his machine, and processed it there. Walton then tells her that Robert stole her DNA because he did something against him in her office. This makes Nanette hysterical and tries to get out of her cockpit and find her way out. Suddenly, she begins to collapse and is brought back to her cockpit, where Robert introduces her as Lieutenant Cole. He then orders her to go to the station, but Nanette refuses to live out her eerie cosmic illusions. This upsets Robert and snaps his fingers. Nanette's face vanished in an instant, leaving her no eyes or nose to see. As she takes her breath, Robert tells her she can't let her die in her own program, so leave her alone in her current state forever, I tell you. Robert returns face as Nanette yields to his demands. She took his breath and obeyed his orders, telling him where Vardak was. Robert asks Walton, Lowry, Packer, and Nanette to accompany him to the planet Rannoch to intercept Vardak. Once on the planet, Robert uses a remote control to monitor Rannoch's atmosphere. Nanette sees Packer with a gun behind her and tells him to ambush Robert and flee, but Packer points out that no gun works except Robert's. Suddenly, Vardak appears and tells Robert that knowledge is required to activate the crystal. However, the captain refused, so Vardak unleashed a terrifying creature known as the Arachnojax. Suddenly, Robert's device rings, announcing that the pizza has arrived, and then pausing the game. Everyone relaxes and awaits his return while Robert returns to reality to pick up his pizza. Walton approached Arachnojax and asked how he was doing, and Lori explained that the creature was another fellow creature named Jillian. Robert turned her into a monster because she didn't want to play. Lowry added that there are many other people like her who have been turned into creatures for deviating from her common sense. Soon Robert returns to the game and tricks Waldak into looking elsewhere so he can shoot him. As Robert stares at his defeated foe, Waldak pleads for an end to his suffering. However, Robert tells him it's against fleet rules to kill him. The crew return to the ship to congratulate the captain, but the moment is ruined when Nanette punches him when he tries to kiss her. Robert raises his hand to punish her, but decides to forgive her instead. He only warns her to reconsider her actions next time before leaving her game. After he is gone, Nanette complains about the idea of kissing Robert. Lowry assures her that he will not go further, and to explain why, Walter takes off his pants to reveal that everyone there is smooth. Enraged, Nanette decides to take Robert down. She claims he is a programmer, not a god. Therefore, he is prone to mistakes. She then asks Dudney about the device Robert had and he tells her that it is his main communication device, the Omniocoda. Nanette concludes that the Omnitor must be connected to the real world, as Omnitor was notified when the pizza arrived. Using a computer, she attempts to hack into Omniocoder's system. Eventually, Nanette will be able to access it and be able to contact someone in the real world. Soon, the real Nanette receives an invitation from Robert to play Infinity, accompanied by a note asking her to cooperate. Confused, she asks Robert about it, but he says it's just spam. Aboard the Infinity, the crew is surprised when Robert arrives earlier than usual. He yells at the crew for trying to ruin his program plans. Nanette quickly admits she sent the message and Robert raises her hand to punish her. Lori protects Nanette and she begs her captain for mercy as Nanette was still a newcomer. But Robert didn't care, so he turned Lori into Arachnojax, terrifying Nanette. He then tells Nanette to change her attitude before leaving the game. Nanette then looks out the window and cries. She then noticed a wormhole in the distance and realized it was an update her patch. Nanette says she tells the others about it and that if she drives into the wormhole, her program will be destroyed and she will die. She repeats that she would rather die and be free than make Robert's fantasies come true, but Packer tells her that the ship can only fly if Robert is in the game. Nanette suggests giving Robert a break and keeping him away until they reach the wormhole. She wants to use the Omnidor to blackmail her true self into making the real Nanette do anything for her, she thinks. The plan convinces Packer, Dudney, and Tulaska, but Walton disagrees. When Nanette asks her why, Walton tells her that her son Tommy once left a lollipop in the office for Robert to take the DNA. Robert then took Tommy to Infinity and threw him out of the airlock. Walton was devastated to see his son die a horrific death in space. Robert later said he keeps all of her DNA in a mini fridge. So if Walton cheats again, he will bring Tommy back to Infinity and kill him again in front of him. This causes Walton to give up hope, but Nanette promises to take DNA from Robert. Robert then arrives, and Nanette immediately tells him that the shuttle has crashed on a nearby planet. He orders Packer and Talaska to accompany him, but Nanette insists on taking her in her place so that she can use her concentration to learn her basics. Robert agrees, and the two head to the planet Skill Lane 4, but when they arrive, Nanette undresses and swims in a nearby lake. Robert reminded her that they were on her duty and said she could write in her report that she was drowning and needed her rescue. Robert reconsiders, but Nanette invites him to join her. When Robert lets go of the omnicoder, Dudney takes him back to the ship, where he accesses Nanette's photo cloud and obtains photos to use against her. In fact, Nanette receives a message with a suggestive photo. When she suddenly receives a call from an unknown number, Walton uses her voice-modifying device to blackmail her into sending a picture of her to everyone he knows if she doesn't do what he says. Meanwhile, Robert was about to get out of the water to complete his mission, so Nanette splashed him with water to buy time for the others. In reality, Nanette arrives at Robert's apartment to have her pizza delivered. As Walton gives instructions to Nanette on Infinity, Dudney immediately sends the Omnitor back to where it was picked up. Suddenly, the Omnicoder rings, so Robert checks it and pauses the game. And in reality, Robert wakes up and goes to the front door. Nanette sees this and immediately sneaks into his house and grabs everything in his small refrigerator. She then presses the answer button on her cell phone, letting the crew in her Infinity know that the DNA has been successfully secured. Virtual Nanette was overjoyed to see this and told Packer to fly her ship towards the wormhole. The real Nanette hears Robert completing the deal, so she immediately replaces his disk with a failing disk and leaves his apartment. Robert then went back to his seat, but he was surprised he couldn't go back to Infinity. He picked up a new set of disks and successfully entered the game. In the game, Robert is surprised to find Nanette gone and calls the ship, but no one answers. Meanwhile, the crew hear Robert talking on the radio, but Nanette tells Thalaska to ignore him. Dudney informs everyone that the wormhole is closing, but Nanette promptly tells Packer that he must fly through the asteroid belt in time. While this is happening, Robert boards an abandoned shuttle and activates it. He then learns that his ship is headed for a wormhole and tracks his crew down to stop it. Dudney notices on the radar that Robert is approaching, and Nanette tells Packer to drive at top speed, which is difficult given the asteroids around. Your ship will take heavy damage from asteroids and the strength of your shields will be reduced. Robert radios them and threatens them with what they will do if the plan fails. As the crew prepares to head to the frontier, they are unlucky enough to encounter a large asteroid that causes engine failure. The ship lost all power, much to Robert's delight. Dudney tells them that the only way to restore power to the ship is for someone to manually repair the jet fader. However, if someone did, they would die in kerosene and be left behind reborn in-game. Before Nanette can judge the situation, Walton is already heading for the jet's fader. He then asks Talaska to get in touch with Robert because he has something to say. Once the connection was made, Walton apologized to Robert, saying that instead of taking all the credit his own, he should have given more credit for creating the game. But Walton killed Tommy in front of him and he can never forgive him. As soon as he pulls the lever, the problem is resolved and the ship's power is restored. Packer immediately starts the engines and steers the ship towards the wormhole. The crew hold hands as the wormhole shrinks and Robert approaches. Eventually they break into the wormhole before it closes, leaving Robert stranded in space, angry and frustrated. The crew members start screaming as the wormhole transforms their bodies into anomalous shapes. As silence surrounds them, they suddenly incarnate in the original version of Infinity. So they are no longer on Robert's computer. Dudney tells her that Firewall has removed Robert's Starfleet mod, meaning he is stuck in the game, making Nanette laugh. Lori and Waldak also make an appearance, and the crew is happy to see them again. Meanwhile, Robert is floating in space when the system announces the deletion of his program. He tried several times to finish the game, but in vain. The program then turns off the lights, leaving Robert forever surrounded by darkness and trapped inside the game. Within Infinity, the crew receives a communication from another player telling them to stay out of their quadrant or the ship will be blown to pieces. Sitting in the captain's chair, Nanette challenges Packer to pilot the ship somewhere else to begin a new adventure.